Welcome back, guys. In this week's episode, we've got some more metal fabrication, and we're going to be finishing up our project from last week. If you haven't seen last week's episode, I'll leave a link up above. And then I'm going to give you guys a few ideas on some of the ways that I use to finish up the metal and finish up the wood. Let's get going. We got these pieces to fabricate up that go all the way around, and we got to finish up our shelves. Alright guys, let's get into this. Now, you don't need a high dollar chop saw to cut up wood and get a straight, accurate cut. Here what I'm doing is called speed cutting. I'm using the actual speed square as a guide to run my saw down, and it gives you super straight and super accurate cuts. You can see it a little bit better right there. I did a real short video a while ago explaining how to do speed cuts. I'll put a link up above for that. Now, there was a little tip in there. What I like to do is I wear my regular work gloves, and then I just put my rubber gloves over it. I buy one box of my rubber gloves one size bigger than I normally take. And that way I can put them right over my regular work gloves, and when it comes time to gluing up stuff, or if I'm putting on solvents or paint or whatnot, it just makes it real handy. Now here I'm measuring out, that's 1/8 inch metal, 2 inch tall, and it's super easy to cut with this saw. I mean, check this out. I drew a line all the way up and down along the metal, but you don't have to do that. You could just put a little tick mark at the top, but look how straight this saw is cutting. This tool is a huge time saver in the workshop. Look at that, no burrs. I mean, look how smooth that is. He just cuts down on fabrication time by so much, and it's just so accurate. Love this thing. I'm going to include this video within the Beginner Welding Series playlist. Within that playlist, you're going to find lots of videos on how to MIG weld, MIG welding basics, stick welding basics, how to weld thin metal, and all kinds of other fabrication tips. Now here I'm doing what's called radius edges. A while back I did a quick video on that, and all that involves is just taking a fender washer, putting it up to the piece of metal, just tracing the edge, and now what I'm doing is I'm putting both pieces together so that I got a left side and a right side, and bringing them over to the bench grinder and grind them together as a whole. So you're grinding two at once. Pretty easy to do. Then you just grind it right to your pencil line. These pieces here are originally going to be screwed into the shelves, and then the shelves were going to be slid in place. I didn't end up doing them that way. It'll be apparent here shortly, and I'll explain it. But what I'm doing here is I'm just laying out for some holes that I wanted to put into the metal. So I'm marking it out, and I'm just using the caliper and a spring-loaded center punch to make an indentation for my drill bit. I'll have links down in the description to all the tools that you see me using, including the spring-loaded center punch and all the others. So these pieces were originally going to be bolted permanently or screwed permanently onto the wooden shelves, and like I said, the shelves would just slide into the metal frame. Well, what happened was that doing it that way, the metal frame had a tendency to kind of like rack left and right. In order for me to stiffen that up, I would have had to put like an X brace on the back. I really didn't want to have that X brace on it. I just visually didn't want that on there. So what I ended up doing, as you'll see here shortly, is I welded this all up as one piece to the wooden shelf, and then I removed the wooden shelf, and then I slid it into the metal rack, and then welded that to the metal rack. So that stiffened the metal rack up really good, and it's what was needed, so that way I didn't have to do the metal brace. So now I'm just adding these pieces to the sides, and I'm just using a simple sheetrock screw to hold it in. Nothing fancy. All it is just to keep that metal held into place. 90% of the stuff that I build or do, I do it in my head, usually beforehand, and then I continue to just wing the last 10% of it as I go. So sometimes you end up with a few design flaws that you don't realize that were there until you actually get to that point where you're ready to put it together. And this was one of those instances. So you can see here now, this is what I wanted, is one complete assembly, and I was just going to slide that into the metal frame. Well, that didn't quite work like I said. So what I ended up having to do is I welded these up, and then I removed the wood from those little pieces, and then I installed those onto the metal frame itself. And that made it so that the frame was really rigid without having to put on any additional support.
Now this piece didn't quite line up exactly the way I wanted it to, so again, here's another little fabrication tip. I'm just using a little adjustable wrench to get that joint just perfect to how I want it, and then once I get it exactly the way I want it, I can tip it up, weld it away. When you're MIG welding, you can push or pull, and I typically like to pull probably most of the time, or drag, and the reason for that is I can see the weld puddle a little bit better. And the whole goal to when you do stuff like this, especially if you're not grinding your welds flush, is to have a visibly good looking weld. It's what people are going to see. So here I have a tendency to, although this isn't code work, this isn't structural stuff, so I'm welding vertical down. On a job site or in the field, that would typically be frowned upon. Typically you'd want to weld vertical up, meaning that you start from the bottom and work your way up, but gravity tends to make your weld look a little bit better. I think it's probably maybe a little less structurally sound, but again, this is a bookcase. We're not doing anything structural with it, so the whole goal and the whole purpose here is to have a aesthetically good looking weld. And for me, I can create a better welding from vertical down than versus vertical up. And I think probably most of you guys that, especially that are starting out as well, you'll find that welding vertical down is actually easier than welding vertical up. And for that reason, that's why I do it.
Alright, so now that everything's welded, now it's time to finish it. I'm going to finish the metal so that it is presentable and it can be used. Well, you can see here now, you can hear that. It's a rough finish there. So we got to clean that down. There are a couple ways of doing it. I'll show you the way that I do it. I use a tool, it's called like a 3-in-1 or a 5-in-1. What this is designed for, it's actually a painting tool. But I like that it has a blade on the front and it's metal on the back, so if you get it like a stubborn BB on your project, you can just hit it with a hammer and it'll break it loose. Let me show you how I do this. So here's a good little example. You have a little piece of spatter or wire right here. You got a little bit of spatter there and a little BB right there. I just take this tool and just run it over everything. Just real quick. There, that's all it takes. And then after I've gone over the whole project doing that, then I go over it with a wire cut brush. And what that does is that if there's any like burrs left behind from the flap disc or anything like that, it'll just gently ease over those edges. So then I go over everything with this. Then the next thing I do is I wipe it all down, and I either use a paint thinner, which is mineral spirits, or I use acetone. And how I determine it is, generally I use paint thinner if I'm going to paint it with a material that says that it's to be reduced with mineral spirits. So for example, Rust-Oleum, their sprayable Rust-Oleum says to thin it with mineral spirits. So if that's the case, that's what I prep the part with. For this case, we're going to use stain. So I'm going to clean it with acetone, because acetone doesn't leave any oil residue behind.
And just like most things when it comes to finish work, the finished work, or the part leading up to the finish, is what takes all the time. Just like here, wiping all this down with acetone, that's one of the most important steps to get a nice, quality, durable, long-lasting finish, is to get all the grease and grime off your part. And what that involves is just keep wiping it down until your rag no longer has any black or grungy looking dirt that's attracted to it. If you've got dirt on it still, then you're not going to get a good finish. So you have to keep washing it down until you do.
Now there are a ton of ways that you guys can finish your metal. This is how I choose to do it. I buy this stuff. It's a metal stain. It's through a company. I order it through Sculpt Nouveau. They make all different colors. I like black, and this has lasted for several projects. So pretty simple to use. You just spray it on, and I'll leave it on for a little bit, then just wipe it off. Okay, just shake it up real well, then just spray it on. It's kind of messy, so you definitely want to wear gloves. That's all there is to it. Kind of goes on like a nice mist, so it makes applying it easy. So now that it's all stained, I want to bring in real close. Now this is a semi-transparent stain. Now this is just one coat. After about an hour, if you want it to not be quite as semi-transparent, you can actually go back through, put another coat on it. But what you'll see here is that, see the areas where I ground it down to make these all smooth? It'll have a lighter area in there. It'll be lighter wherever you grind it, flush, well, where you get the mill scale off, I should say. So what I usually do is, so that this isn't such a harsh transition from a semi-transparent to bright and shiny, I go back through and I'll darken these areas up just to make it a little subtle of a transition. But yeah, that's all stained. I usually go back through, I usually do, like I said, 2 coats here and there. I'll put on a second coat real light, and then when you're done you can spray on a clear polyurethane finish if you want, and that'll help seal it up. But yeah, so that's what it looks like stained. I love the looks of that semi-transparent kind of, it just looks real rich. I don't know if it's really showing on camera, but I don't know, it just has a real warm feel to it. So here are 3 shelves. I've wheeled them outside because I don't want to do any sanding in the workshop while that stain's trying to dry. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to round the top edge, then we're just going to ease the bottom edge. That's where we're going to start. I'll show you how I do that. Now to ease the top edge, all I use is just a simple round over bit in a router zip, and I find that it's real maneuverable. I've done it this way for years. You can set how much round over you want by bringing this in or out of this shoe. It's just a real quick, effective way that I like doing it.
Which you'll see a lot of guys that do drywall, they'll use these with a spiral cutting bit on the end, and they stick it in the drywall, and then they use it to cut out around the electrical boxes. Well, the great thing about this tool is that they have a 1/4 inch collet, which almost all of the smaller size router bits are all 1/4 inch. So it makes for a real versatile tool to hold a router bit. You can see how nice that edge is right there. So you could do more than just a round over bit. You could do all kinds of different designs, but you know, putting a router bit inside this tool makes for a very versatile, easy to handle, and quick tool that isn't bulky and gaumy. As long as you have a router bit that has the bearing on the end of it, then it works great. If you don't have the router bit that has the bearing, it's going to dig into the wood and it's going to give you a real poor job. But what I'm doing here is I'm just sanding it with 120. Now I'm putting on some 220, going over it with that, finishing it up, getting it nice and smooth.
So they're all sanded to 220. Now we're going to really make the grain structure within this wood pop. Now the next steps, we're going to put a nice light coat of stain on it, and then we're going to clear it with some poly. For the stain, I'm going to use a early American color. Now you get to see what it looks like for a color without it being burned and with it being burned. So we'll start on the natural side on the back first. So this is it without being burned. Now let's do the other side. See how that grain, it just pulled the grain out, so you can see it a lot better. I personally like that look. It just kind of makes it look a little bit richer, I think. Gives it kind of a warmer feeling. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a comparison. You've got the burn side and the not burn side.
So what do you guys think? Do you like the side that I burned better, or do you like the side that wasn't burned better? Let me know. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think.
So what do you think of that, guys? That looks pretty rich, huh? I'm loving how this came out. So actually this is going to be going down. I'm going to be actually transporting this down to Chicago this summer, and it's going to be going to one of my family members. But geez, I like this so much, I'm actually kind of jealous. I think I want one for myself now. So this will look pretty cool in like an office. for like a bookshelf, or if you had some stuff to display. Yeah, I'm really liking this. So hopefully you guys like it as much as I do. It actually came out a little bit better than I thought. I really love this contrast between the grainy wood in this semi-transparent stained metal. I don't know, it just looks super rich. Love it. Sometimes that's kind of the hard part when you build stuff for other people. You kind of get attached to it and you like it. So I just love how that looks, that contrast. But I don't know, maybe I'll build one for myself. And that's all there is to it, guys. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you're enjoying these build series. If you want to find out what I'm working on before it makes it up to YouTube, you can catch me on Instagram and on Facebook. I'll put the links down below. I'll catch you guys next week, guys. Till then, stay safe. See ya.